A single strike in the dead of night has shattered the illusion of Iranian invincibility. In Tehran, where shadows of power once stretched unchallenged over every street and office, the man who held the fragile threads of the Islamic Republic together is gone. Ali Larijani, the last voice of pragmatism amid a sea of hardliners, has been eliminated. And with him, the very architecture of Iranian strategy has begun to collapse. For decades, he was the unseen hand balancing military ambition against political reality, negotiating with the West while maintaining the loyalty of the Revolutionary Guard. A man whose intellect and restraint kept a volatile state from careening into open chaos. Now, with his sudden death in a precision strike, the room is empty for those who once bridged ideology and governance. Tehran wakes to a silence heavy with uncertainty. A city where whispers of fear and rumors of retaliation fill the streets. What began as a tactical operation has evolved into a geopolitical earthquake, and the aftershocks are already shaking the foundations of every power with stakes in the Middle East. The Iranian regime, long thought to be a fortress of unyielding power, has suddenly shown cracks that run deeper than anyone anticipated. Alongside Larijani, the head of the Basij paramilitary, Gholamreza Soleimani, has also reportedly been killed, leaving the internal security apparatus in unprecedented disarray. The precision of these strikes signals a shift from the destruction of infrastructure to the systematic dismantling of leadership itself. The global community watches with bated breath, aware that this vacuum could ignite cascading consequences far beyond Tehran, from economic upheaval to the ignition of wider conflicts across the region. The removal of Iran's strategic brain is not merely a military victory, it is the opening chapter of a potentially transformative and perilous era in the Middle East, where every calculation, every move, is magnified by the stakes of survival, power, and global stability. The reaction of Iran's regional allies and adversaries has been swift and calculated, revealing the intricate web of geopolitical tension that has long simmered beneath the surface. Russia, which has historically played a balancing act between diplomacy and military posturing, has shifted abruptly from cautious statements to a posture that intelligence analysts describe as active deterrence. Reports indicate that Russian S-400 and S-500 systems in Syria and along Iran's northern borders have been placed on automatic engagement for any unidentified aerial activity, a move that underscores Moscow's anxiety over a potential collapse of the Iranian state. Larijani was the only figure capable of speaking Western pragmatism while thinking Eastern strategy, and without him, Russia faces a volatile environment dominated by the Revolutionary Guard's most radical elements. Moscow has reportedly dispatched high-level military advisors to assist in reorganizing the remnants of Iran's command network, a tacit acknowledgement that the situation could spiral into wider regional instability. The absence of a stabilizing voice like Larijani's has shifted the calculus for every power involved, forcing actors to consider not just immediate military outcomes, but the long-term consequences of a headless Iranian state, where decision-making is increasingly reactive and uncompromising. It is a tense chessboard, one where each move carries the risk of igniting a broader confrontation that no one can fully control. Inside Israel, the implications of this strike reverberate in both political and psychological spheres. While the military achievement of removing a top Iranian strategist has been celebrated as a decisive victory, the shadow of ongoing threats continues to haunt the population. Air raid sirens in Tel Aviv and Haifa, alongside the persistent threat of Iranian-made drones circumventing defensive systems, have created a climate of anxiety that underscores the incomplete nature of any so-called triumph. The psychological burden of war is universal. Parents shielding their children, families trapped in the uncertainty of survival, communities grappling with the persistent reminder that technology can turn even the most secure spaces into zones of vulnerability. In the wider Middle East, the human cost of these operations cannot be overstated. Gaza, Beirut, and Tehran themselves are now arenas where strategy and survival intersect, where the calculus of victory is measured not merely in territory gained or leaders eliminated, but in the resilience of civilian populations caught between powers that see conflict as an instrument of policy rather than a last resort. On the battlefield, Iran has demonstrated the deadly effectiveness of asymmetric tactics, merging high-end ballistic capabilities with low-cost drone swarms in a manner that forces opposing forces into impossible choices. A single interceptor costing millions of dollars can be compelled to neutralize a drone built for a fraction of that cost, creating a system of economic attrition that stretches defenses to their breaking point. The redeployment of U.S. THAAD batteries from East Asia to counter these threats has exposed vulnerabilities elsewhere, particularly in the Pacific, where North Korea and other regional powers watch the shifting balance with calculated interest. The interconnectedness of global security has never been more apparent. A strike in Tehran reverberates in Seoul, Washington, and beyond, reshaping strategic priorities and forcing nations to reconsider where and how they project power. The Iranian leadership's use of technology to circumvent conventional military superiority exemplifies a new form of warfare, one where ingenuity can offset numerical and technological advantages, leaving even the most dominant militaries forced to reconsider their approach. Economically, the conflict has sent shockwaves through global trade networks, particularly in the energy sector. Iran's moves to isolate the petrodollar and establish a yuan-only mandate have triggered disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz, a critical artery for global oil transport. Hundreds of tankers are stranded or destroyed, insurance markets have frozen, and financial centers from London to Tokyo are bracing for unprecedented instability. The combination of military action and economic restructuring has exposed the vulnerability of global systems once thought invulnerable, demonstrating that modern conflict is not contained to battlefields alone, but spreads into trade, finance, and the delicate balance of international relations. At the same time, the civilian population within Iran bears the brunt of these disruptions. While the regime's leadership may be fractured, the Revolutionary Guard's tightening control ensures that daily life remains fraught with scarcity and uncertainty, a tension between state power and human resilience that cannot be fully quantified. Perhaps the most unnerving aspect of this new reality is the emergence of Iran's advanced maneuverable missiles, capable of traveling at hypersonic speeds and rendering traditional detection and interception methods virtually obsolete. These weapons, operating at Mach 5, compress the window of response to almost zero, making every launch a high-stakes gamble for both attackers and defenders. The mere presence of such technology forces entire naval task forces to operate at the periphery, fundamentally altering strategic calculations and reinforcing the idea that asymmetric innovation can challenge even the most formidable military powers. This technological shift is emblematic of a broader transformation in global conflict, where strategic supremacy is no longer determined solely by size and budget, but by adaptability, precision, and the capacity to create uncertainty in an opponent's decision-making process. In this environment, every decision carries weight, and every miscalculation could escalate a regional conflict into a global crisis. With Larijani gone, the political landscape inside Iran has shifted dramatically. The vacuum of leadership has allowed ultra-hardline figures within the Revolutionary Guard and other factions to consolidate power, removing the last remaining voice of pragmatism from the decision-making process. The rise of less experienced, more radical figures presents a dangerous scenario, a regime that is simultaneously destabilized and yet capable of responding with lethal force, driven by ideology rather than strategy. Even with a significant portion of their missile infrastructure destroyed, Iran continues to launch retaliatory strikes, proving that a headless government can remain deadly. The stakes of diplomacy have never been higher. The opportunity to prevent an escalation into wider regional destruction is narrowing with every passing day. Global powers are now confronted with a paradox. To intervene decisively risks escalation, while inaction invites further destabilization. It is a delicate balance, where each moment of hesitation could determine whether the Middle East emerges from this conflict in relative stability or descends further into chaos. Beyond Iran, the response of international powers has been a mixture of strategic recalibration and cautious posturing. Moscow's deployment of electronic warfare assets underscores the Kremlin's determination to maintain influence and prevent total collapse, reflecting an acute awareness that the disintegration of Iran's command structure could have consequences that extend far beyond the region. In Israel, political and military leaders grapple with the legacy of their own decisions, balancing the immediate tactical successes against the long-term pressures of maintaining security while minimizing civilian casualties. Oil markets remain volatile, alliances are tested, and the global distribution of power is in flux, with every strategic calculation influenced by the knowledge that even a single action in Tehran can ripple across continents. The unfolding events illustrate a sobering truth about modern conflict. Leadership, technology, and ideology intersect in ways that make outcomes unpredictable, and the margin for error vanishingly small. This conflict has redefined the very notion of victory. The top layers of Iran's leadership may have been removed, but the regime remains resilient, entrenched, and capable of inflicting significant damage. The removal of a bridge builder like Ali Larijani narrows the path to diplomacy, while simultaneously accelerating the rise of more extreme elements. The region, and indeed the world, is now watching the consequences of a calculated decapitation strategy, aware that military success alone cannot resolve a conflict driven by ideology, technology, and economic interdependence. The story that began with a single targeted strike has evolved into a sprawling, multidimensional struggle, testing the capacity of global powers to manage both immediate danger and long-term stability. As the smoke rises over Tehran and reverberates across the Middle East, the human cost remains central. Millions of civilians caught in the machinery of war, their survival dependent not on the calculations of generals, but on the wisdom and restraint of leaders who must confront the unprecedented complexity of modern conflict. The coming days will determine whether this crisis escalates into irreversible devastation, or whether a path toward stability, however fragile, can be forged amidst the chaos.